Good afternoon, and welcome to our first Impact Live of the new year. Are you ready to lead in 2026? My name is Dusya Vera, and I am delighted to be your moderator today. I'm also a professor at the Ivey Business School and the executive director of the Ihnatowycz Institute for Leadership, the premier Canadian institute for the study and development of character leadership. The first month of 2026 is almost gone. Time moves quickly, but are we moving with intention? There is an ancient question that every leader must answer anew. What kind of leader will I be? Not what will I do, but who will I become? This question matters now more than ever. As AI reshapes work, as geopolitical complexity multiplies, leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about the person making those decisions, about character as much as competence, about habits of mind and heart that sustain excellence over time. The leaders who will thrive aren't those who have all the answers. They are the ones who have the courage to question themselves, the humility to keep learning, and the discipline to grow deliberately. Today, we explore how to become that kind of leader. We're going to start with a poll. We would love to hear your perspective and invite you to participate in the following quick poll, which you have on your screen already. What is your top leadership priority for 2026? And you have to click one of four options. A is cultivating happiness and well-being for myself and my team. B is adapting to AI and technological disruption. C is building organizational resilience. And D is navigating geopolitical and economic uncertainty. So I'm going to give you a few seconds, and then we will see the results here. Let's see. Okay, we have the results. So number one is in this group is building organizational resilience, 44%. Then we have adapting to AI, a second, and third, cultivating happiness, and navigating geopolitical and economic uncertainty is actually fourth in this group. We also did this poll on LinkedIn. We had fostering happiness and wellness first there with AI second. And we did this poll also on Instagram, and we had AI first and happiness and well-being second. So, we have different perspective, it seems. And we're going to ask our panelists that question in a second. I am really excited to discuss these issues and how leaders can handle these tensions with our three esteemed panelists who bring diverse and valuable perspectives from governance, coaching, and technology innovation. Their formal bios are on our website, but I will introduce them here briefly. Rahul Bhardwaj, President and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Molly Edge, Executive Coach, Ivey Business School Executive Education. And Candice Faktor, who is one of our HBAs, year 2000, and the co-founder and co-CEO of Disco. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. So let's ask the question to our panelists to think about this poll. As you look ahead for the most pressing priority of 2026, either from the poll or in general, what is your most pressing precedent priority? I'm going to start with Rahul.
Great, lovely to be here. I'm thinking about the conversation that we've been having at boards, so corporate governance for years, and it was around uncertainty. Now, on the one hand, it's the acceleration and evolution of uncertainty. Everybody was trying to wrap their heads around it. It was digital, it was geopolitical, but you would also have directors say, well, there's nothing new about that. Our job is really to lead within uncertainty. That's just the nature of what we do. But there was always an attempt to try to qualify that and understand what that uncertainty was. Now, recently, our prime minister used the word disruption, not transition, which I think really coalesced the idea of what are we talking about when we're talking about uncertainty. And interestingly, I think we're in a phase now where in some people's minds, the discomfort of the old uncertainty might be actually better than the discomfort of the new certainty that's emerging in this disruption. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, and I know boards are doing this everywhere, what do you do to manage all of this? It's all around building a culture of resilience. So if you ask me about the priority, it's in this world of uncertainty, you have to build this culture of resilience. And there are lots of ways to do it. We're going to get into aspects of that conversation in a minute. But I think the first part for most leaders is focus on what you can control.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So you agree with the poll that we had here. Let's go to Molly next. Molly, what do you think?
Really appreciate being here in this conversation. And Rahul, thanks for setting the stage. I had to, of course, but I would say that activating happiness and well-being influences how we develop resiliency. So these two priorities could be the conduits for the other priorities, such as adaptability, navigating, and of course, developing resiliency, which does take work. Defining what resilience means in an organization and within leaders and teams, defining what well-being means. These are what give perspective and goals around what we're trying to achieve. What does resiliency look like? Because as Rahul mentioned, we are leading and will forever lead in unpredictable, uncertain, and unstable waters. So what's required of us as leaders to really cultivate, grow ourselves and others to sustain purpose and prioritize our well-being, along with committing to our responsibility in our roles in the organization.
Thank you, Molly. You remind me of that saying that world peace starts with inner peace, right? So starting with what we can control, which is our internal peace, our happiness, and then that will allow us to build resilience and other aspects. Let's go to Candice. What is your priority, Candice?
It's great to be here, so thank you for having me. And listening to Rahul and Molly, I'd like to say I completely agree that we are living in increasingly uncertain times where not just the change, but the velocity of change is so much faster. And so I think that's really important to realize. It feels in many ways that change is coming from multiple directions, whether it's geopolitical or it's reimagining workflows with AI, or business models that are changing. And so when I think about that, I think about the core skill of courage, because you need to have courage in order to face this level of uncertainty. And with that courage comes the willingness and openness to adapt and to change and to transform. And I love the way Rahul put it, which is there is much more certainty in the uncertainty or in the disruption. So, for many years, I've worked in innovation and disruption, and we've been like a small piece to the core, ongoing business. I think what's happening now is disruptive methodologies are becoming more and more important for the core to actually learn from. And it's quite different, a view where you can control many of the variables versus a view where there's lots of variables, lots of chaos, and how do you make sense of that chaos to adapt to it?
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get more specific now. Let's move to specific practices that leaders can take to improve their leadership this year. And I'm going to go and continue with you, Candice, because we're so happy to have you here as an AI expert. You have mentioned in some of your presentations that AI can actually make organizations more human. So can you please share an example of how leaders can successfully use AI that way to make organizations more human and enhance, the human elements in organizations? And how can leaders prepare themselves for this shift? Tell us from your experience.
Well, thank you, because it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. A lot of people are very afraid of AI. It's a very existential technology and it's a very new technology. And it has real consequences in organizations. And so many people look at AI as changing the economics and cost structure of organizations and as a replacement tool for human work and human labor. And I think this causes a very human-like response, which is fear and anxiety and existential crisis for many people. I think it's important to say AI can also put humans first. And when leaders go into organizations with a mindset of AI being an enabler and a capability builder and an opportunity for humans to do more human work, the impact of AI on culture radically shifts. So what do I mean by this? In many ways, automating and reimagining workflows that humans have done for many, many years that are tedious, that take a lot of time, that take you out of the work that you actually want to be doing. Let's even look at leadership development or anybody who's running courses or training programs. Many people are stuck in the minutia of actually the manual labor of creating the content, figuring out the cohorts, managing the operations. If you can free people up to do the work that is more human, which is facilitating the discussion, having meaningful conversations, having the opportunity to not be buried in so much, work that can be automated, you can make your company more human. That's one way. The second way is most of the technology that we work with today doesn't treat humans very much like humans. It's very clunky. It's very arduous. I don't know if you're stuck in old software that doesn't feel very human, but actually generative AI is a more human-like experience. I can talk to it. I can use my voice. I can type to it. It can give me feedback. And so if we treat it this way, it's more human. And the last pillar that I'll mention is it can actually allow human beings to do work that they've always dreamed of, but they didn't have the ability to scale. So I can double click on that, but I won't take up too much time here. But I do think the frame of which you're bringing AI into your organization and the way in which you lead with these transformation efforts has a really big impact on the way your teams will respond to it.
Thank you for that perspective, Candice, and we'll be able to get a little bit more into that, but thank you for framing it that way. Let me go to Molly now, because you bring to this conversation your experience as an executive coach, and you help leaders develop self-awareness and their effectiveness. So please tell us, how can leaders create the conditions for real growth in 2026, not just checking boxes in leadership development, and how can leaders really challenge their own entrenched ways of thinking?
Well, thank you, Dusya. This is such an important question. And Candice, you touched upon it. It is around how do we reimagine and relate to what is coming at us versus just the nice quick fix of hoping we're going to get through. Creating conditions for growth and achievement. This is the tension and responsibility that leaders hold. Navigation, cultivation, adaptation, as Candice said, to grow competent, resilient, future forward leaders, as Rahul mentioned, and teams. These aren't checklist aspirations. So in our current climate, we have to learn to hold this paradox of being transactional and transformational, where we need leaders to reflect on their way, on how they're behaving and influencing these conditions for people and teams in the organizations. And we know through brain research that conditions need to feel safe and healthy and trustworthy for people to even want to learn to grow. Humans are our greatest asset, and it's a very powerful currency. And I do this because I think of the brain. Checklist, there's a big fix. It's quick. It's dopamine. It's fast. Humans don't learn that way. So leaders require a very intentional way of operating. tapping into their consciousness. Because if we don't think differently, and both Candice and Rahul have noted, what cost will this make on how we lead to create these conditions? So in our work as with coaches and with leaders, it is to access the team and leaders thinking at a deeper level. Leaders can ask themselves, what do you believe is needed to learn and develop within themselves to purposefully and strategically operate to create ideal conditions? What matters most for them as a leader right now and in the future for themselves, their teams, and expected outcomes? What strengths and values can be flexed in this situation that aligns with the impact on your people, your teams, your systems, and culture in the organization? These aren't checklist items. In fact, there's been a study that we did in a really large financial institution in 2019. And for 3 years, they actually won a global award for using coaching and leadership development to create a strategy of an ecosystem of care, growth, and achievement. They realized that in order to retain clients and generate more growth on all business fronts, leaders needed to cultivate conditions to grow their people and teams at the front lines. They had a metrics to measure it, but it really was training, reflection, listening, feedback, collaborative strategizing. And it was a very intentional process. And what resulted in the organization from this process of leaders and really managing their behaviors and creating an infrastructure on how we do it here is the quality of client relationships, which was the goal, increased. Staff retention increased. So this was between 2019 and 2021. So remember those years. Enhanced performance metrics. And really what surprised everyone out of this study, including this financial institution, was enhanced well-being in the workplace. So leaders can truly be attentive, as you said, Dusya, and doing won't get the long game impact that we're looking for.
Thank you, Molly. That seems like a call for reflection, right? For attentiveness, for paying attention to those details. Rahul, let me go to you now for something specific. You have the vantage point from being surrounded by board members and CEOs, top management teams. Can you share us an example of CEOs, what board members are doing, again, to continue refining their leadership, evolving their leadership for today's times?
Sure. So I'm going to build on some of the comments that you've already heard, but I'm going to take us to the other side of the planet for a moment for really the example. And the example I'm going to describe, I think you'll see with a lot of Canadian boards and companies, because we're doing very well on a number of fronts, but we're also, we've got a rupture, a disruption coming out of transition. So we need to build what I'm going to say is a different muscle. And I want to describe that a little bit. So in the fall, I was in Singapore and Hong Kong meeting with corporate directors and speaking at some conferences around issues in corporate governance on dealing with these emerging uncertainties. Now, what was interesting is that the ASEAN countries, so when you start to think of the Singapores, Thailands, Vietnams, they all had to deal with a situation that Canada is faced with right now. And that is, how do you deal when you've got a big neighbor? We've obviously got the US, they had China, and they had a series of disruptions that they had to navigate as well. So the question to them was, for CEOs and boards, how do we deal with this environment and this emerging uncertainty or new certainty? And I was introduced to some related concepts that I thought were just great. One was the poison shrimp strategy, and one was the dolphin strategy. And I think these are things that we'd be really wise to think about in Canada, where we are faced right now. And in short, the notion was the poison shrimp strategy was where all of these small countries and companies would compete with each other to try to get ahead of each other in their attempt to deal with China's outsized influence in their area. But an economist came up with this notion of the dolphin strategy. And this actually gets right down into the leadership. And the notion of the dolphin strategy is that you all move in tandem together, that you collaborate more than you compete. And this is about building a different muscle. And they've been highly successful in the Southeast Asian countries on developing this capacity to actually collaborate more than compete in order to actually work with this giant influence in their area. Been highly successful there. So it's about building relationships. It's about building that new muscle of moving from competition to collaboration in this new environment. And what I'm describing here, I heard 6-7 months ago, but did I hear a lot of the echoes of this in our Prime Minister's recent speech when he's talking about how do Canadian companies and leaders navigate this new world? It's about diversifying. Isn't this interesting? We had diversity, it went up, it went down. But guess what? Those words come back, but now in a slightly different context. And it's about mitigating risk, creating new opportunities. You have to diversify. But what I'm seeing more successful CEOs, management teams, and boards focused on is really how do we collaborate? That doesn't mean you don't compete, but collaboration is really what's going to get you over that hump.
Great, great. Thank you. Now, at Ivey, we talk a lot about effective leadership being a combination of competence, the skills and the knowledge to execute, and character, the values and the virtues of who we are and how we lead. So let me ask you a question about that, about effective leadership. Let me start with Molly. In your experience, Molly, what character dimensions do leaders are going to need most to navigate 2026, and how do leaders work on cultivating those character dimensions?
Mm-hmm. Well, they become dolphins, thanks to Rahul. But let's be honest, we've all noted leaders have a high stakes role, as do teams. They need to consider all the dimensions of their character to hold this responsibility of people and decision making and system processes and overall organization performance. So courage was noted by Candice. And we have to remember that these characteristics don't stand alone. The skills are always going to be learned. But in order to mobilize together with care, as Rahul said, grit and determination, it takes courage. So you said not to be the expert rather than the learner as leader. How do I think differently? What are different strategies? The curiosity, courageous curiosity, is the gateway for respectful partnerships. It increases awareness. There's brain science behind curiosity, and it facilitates growth. What is something you want to understand and learn more from for yourself, from your team, and in the world? That is a question of an example. Integrity is another characteristic. Honesty. People want the truth right now. We can be certain, as Candice said, on what we know. People want to hear it, validate it. It feels safe to know things aren't sneaky. People want transparency, caring candor. They remember what they see and how you make them feel. This is what people learn about you and from you. It's okay to say, I don't know, but here's what I do know. This is something that is really powerful in the way we work together. Humility. Leadership wins the heads and the hearts of people. What would it take to let the armor down? And give yourself a check-in. Be kind. Be committed to your self-worth. Believe in your ability to learn and grow as a productive leader. And this is all based on the characteristic of humanity. Accessing the wisdom, trustworthiness, care, and allyship of the individuals around you. Rahul, that was such an awesome example of, on the other side of the world, this is how they're doing it. There's collective wisdom within humans. So what impact do you want to have on others? How do you share what people and teams, how they're impacting you? What does care and compassion and collaboration look like in your leadership behaviors? Those are my top 5.
All of them, all of the character dimensions. Let me go to Rahul and then to Candice. Rahul?
Okay, so I want to complement those instead of just repeating them, because I think, you did a great job, Molly, pulling them together. I'm going to channel Jamie Dimon for a second. I don't often do this, but I saw a piece of him recently talking about that the further you go on your leadership journey up the corporate ladder, as it were, the less you know, not the more you know. And what he was really driving at is the importance of, I think, self-awareness and humility, and recognizing that actually the ones that tend to fail are the ones that think they actually know more than they do. It's that old Socratic principle of the notion of, the beginning of knowledge is when you know that you do not know. And that piece of humility and self-awareness, I think, are going to be really vital to leaders. If you really think you've figured this uncertainty out, and you're dead sure what you want to go, you can be dead sure and dead wrong as well. And we're living in a world where you're going to get multiple inputs, and you have to have the strength of character, in my view, the self-awareness and the humility to know that you don't know, but not get paralyzed by fear in that moment either. And that's when that courage is going to be very important, not only in the broader sense, but in a very personal sense, of that sense of vulnerability. Everybody's going through it. Nobody's got it figured out. But having that dose of humility and self-awareness, I think, is very helpful.
Thank you, Candice.
I like the way Rahul put it. I certainly don't need to repeat what's being said, even though I absolutely agree. I think I'll take it one step further, and maybe this is where the entrepreneur in me comes in, is I think we're all being forced to be more entrepreneurial. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, what entrepreneurs do differently than leaders is that they are very curious. They're very, in many ways, intellectually humble because they don't know. You're living in a world of so many unknowns. But what they do is they make decisions, they have agency, and they adapt. And they do that really quickly. And, there's something called anti-fragility, which is, not just being resilient to uncertainty or change or disruption, but it's actually learning how to take advantage of the underlying changes or transformations or disruptions. And I think in a world that's changing so quickly for all of us, we're all, as leaders now, being called to not just be self-aware, not just collaborate, but actually to adapt, to make decisions around change, to have learning curves that are much quicker in our organizations, and to be intellectually humble as we go through them and willing to actually drive new decisions as a result. So it's a tall order and a high call to action, but this is what the new landscape is requiring of business leaders, in my humble opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. And because we're still in January, and every time we start a new year, we think about, New Year resolutions, taking on new learning, creating new habits. At Ivey, we talk about character as the habit of being, the habits of who we are. So let's talk a little bit about your recommendations for leaders in terms of seeing the new year and working with intention on creating habits of leadership. So I'm going to start with Molly again, because you have your coaching expertise. What advice are you giving leaders who want to develop better habits of leadership, but struggle with consistency, Molly?
Well, I appreciate how Candice has really cast a provocative goal to be absolutely decision-making, agile decision makers. I feel like I'm putting my seatbelt on, buckling up, because it is true. And growth takes, learning takes practice, commitment, intentionality. Habits are not back to this checklist. So as coaches and leaders, it has to come from a place of, how do people think differently? What is their values, motivation, and internal reward system connected to the habit that they want to create? What is their personal success strategy, their ownership in that habit to learn it and grow it? We don't know how people make things stick. So our job as coaches is to help think about what way will you step up and commit and make this a new normal if this habit is important. So it starts with thinking. Back to like Rahul, shifting your self-awareness. What would this habit do for me? There's got to be a personal impact. What would matter about this habit to others and the results that I'm striving for? And we all learn better together. Accountability partners. What will you put in place to stay the course? Knowing yourself, because we're going to have disruptions. How will you handle that? So neuroscience always tells us again and again, what we pay attention to strengthens. So mindset is the engine. Our thoughts predict our behaviors. This is the power of coaching leaders and teams, really helping leaders think in a way that their habits can be visualized and come alive. They can also be very practical and have to be. Daily habits have to be part of the practice. Symbols, rituals, milestones need to be measured. We need to feel and be reminded that we can do things if they matter. Small commitments daily. I've seen organizations, again, just change the way they operate from building habits into the way leaders lead. It becomes their systemic infrastructure. Joey Restaurant Group won an award for shifting. We serve great food to leaders need to think differently about how we're growing extraordinary human experiences at every level of the organization, because we need to retain our staff. We need to build business, and we have 12 properties in the next 7 years that we want to develop across the country. We need to think about how do our habitual behaviors as leaders achieve those goals. And company incorporated many rituals and practices around listening, having empathy. They could be soft habits, and they absolutely measured it along the way. And as a return, they, 30% growth in revenue, 132% increased employee retention. They learn habits around people connection. And it absolutely served their business objectives. So it takes practice, it takes commitment, and it takes accountability. And it has to matter meaningfully inside the humans of leaders and in the organizational culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. Change management starts with habit development, you're saying. Habit development can lead to change management. Candice, habits in the space of AI. I think everybody's going to be curious about your answer. What daily or weekly practices do you recommend to leaders in the world of AI, maybe to stay human-centered or to learn, to integrate AI? What is your recommendation?
So I love the frame, and I'll say, the first habit is the habit of mind, right? It's reframing what AI is for you and for your team and for your company. And if you're approaching it from a place of fear, just like Molly said, you're going to get a certain kind of response, like a flight, fright, or fear, freeze response. And so I always say, we need to find the opportunity. It needs to be an amplifier of human potential. And so really it actually starts with framing the opportunity for your organization and for yourself. The second one is rethinking the way you see your role and the workflow and work you do to being one that isn't fixed, but rather fluid, a fluid capability. And if you think of it in a fluid way, you're more open and willing to experiment with these tools. And so the third one is moving from complete overwhelm, which many people feel. They feel very overwhelmed, like, how should I use it? How should my team use it? How do I get these, output gains and capability gains, to one of experimentation? And so this is where, I've built a platform called Disco, which is everything Molly's saying, which is you need human connection. You need learning experiences where people can share their experiences, where you can actually have projects, where you can do experimentation, where you actually get better because you practice. And so what I would say when it comes to AI, it's very much you're not going to know everything on day one, but you learn through doing. You learn through trying. You learn through experimentation. You learn through peer feedback and understanding how others in your organization are using it. You learn through actually dedicating the time to understand what's even possible. So I would say it's not all that different, but it starts first as a leader with a mindset that this is going to actually build capability and give my team superpowers versus be a fear-driven replacement existential strategy.
Thank you. Rahul, let's go to you. From your governance perspective, what practices or rituals do you see in effective CEOs, top management teams, corporate boards, again, to create new habits that allow continuous growth?
So the big picture, at least from a corporate governance standpoint and boards, is the starting place has always been nose in, fingers out. So don't do management's job. We're in a different space now. Now, I'm not saying that rule doesn't apply, but you've got to lean in. Everybody needs to lean in now. And where does that start from my perspective is really developing a curiosity and a learning mindset. And I can point to three things that I think are particularly helpful on that. You asked about rituals here. I'm thinking about the role of the chair of a board these days is so much, it's always been really important, but now it's even, I would say, even more important. And the chairs that are leaning in, I think, are finding it's been very beneficial for both the board and for the management team around constant communications. That says, Chair, are you contacting all of your directors before board meetings? Are you having ongoing conversations to find out what are the critical issues? How are they feeling about issues one-on-one? Don't wait for the board meeting. Do all that work in the background. Make sure you're communicating with the CEO so they can get feedback from the management team. So you've got more alignment going into a board meeting around the issues to talk about, not necessarily the solutions, but the issues. So you make sure that you're focused on the right thing. Second thing I'm seeing, and this is why we're still so busy at ICD, the Institute of Corporate Directors is there for board education, and good boards are committed to doing that ongoing education. And that feeds right into the curiosity and the learning mindset. Things are changing so quickly. What are your peers doing? What's the emerging thought around in different regulatory environments? How are people dealing with it? So you've got to stay on top of that. And I'd say the third one is spending time together. It's a strange time. Here we are, digital. We're doing everything via Zoom. This is lovely. But we all know that when you're together, you have a different type and quality of contact. And boards that are spending time together find it very beneficial. And boards that spend time with the management teams, not just within a board meeting, but around a board meeting. You start to develop the trust and the relationships you need to help navigate these really uncertain times.
I'm hearing human connection as a theme here. All of you have mentioned a human connection collaboration. Before we go into the audience questions, we have a few questions we have received from the audience, either before today or during this time. Let me ask you one more question to the three of you, and I'm just going to give you 1 minute each, very specific. What is one practical step a leader can take this week to strengthen their readiness for 2026? Okay, so 1 minute. I'm going to start with Candice.
The one step I would say is just dedicate 30 minutes of daily use to experimenting with new AI tooling in ways that actually you're afraid of, right? The only way you're going to learn is through doing.
Yeah, the playing. People call it playing. Play for 30 minutes with AI. Thank you, Candice. Rahul, what is your one thing?
A variation of what Candice just said, but I say learn something new. Doesn't matter what it is. AI, or you want to learn to sing. If you want to learn it, learn something new. I think it's going to make you happy, but if anything, it's going to help build up the type of curiosity and energy that you're going to need to carry you through all of the other things.
Great. And Molly?
Breathe.
It's very important.
Reflect and reflect with curiosity. Check, tune in before you tune out. A colleague of mine, her practice, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Set daily intentions. And like Rahul said, access that mindset, breathe, reflect, and remember the thinking that you want, because it's going to inform your behaviors.
Great. Yeah, we're running around all the time. Stop, breathe, reflect, and that allows learning that both Candice and Rahul are mentioning. Thank you. Thank you for those advices. Now, let's go to some of the questions that we have received. Let me see here. Okay, so this is actually about learning. So let's talk about that. What are the challenges in continuing to evolve a learning organization and people, given the rapid change, technology, economy, geopolitical, as one pillar to build organizational resilience? So it builds on what we have talked, this impetus for learning, but it acknowledges that sometimes it can be challenging to have that time or that space. So tell us a little bit about that. Challenges in continuing to evolve a learning organization and people giving change. Who wants to start with that? Maybe Candice, because you are in a learning environment and your organization cares about that a lot.
I think one of the challenges is that organizations don't have the infrastructure to allow for learning that involves human connection. And what do I mean by that? Many organizations, don't have learning systems that are consumption-oriented systems, right? It's like, watch these videos that are outdated and let me click that I've watched the video. And that's what the organization considers learning. Or, there's just no time or programming created for everything this group has been talking about, which is having real human connection in learning, peer-based learning, project-based learning, practice-based learning. There is tremendous science that says this is how people learn best. And so, for me, it's about how do you do this in a world that is incredibly busy? We're all working super hard on actually getting our work done. And so sometimes it's not possible to meet in person. So how do you actually put the tooling in place that allows for, human connection, peer-based learning, project-based learning in your organization? And I think it's essential that you make the space and time and have the right tooling to allow for that. That would be, one of the ways I would deal with that challenge.
Thank you. Molly or Rahul, do you want to jump into that question? Or we can look at another one.
Go ahead, Molly. I'll follow you.
Well, I really briefly, Candice, I really appreciate this notion of building it into our infrastructure. Challenges get solved when we are tracking where are we at and what's going on. How can we be curious? And that takes human interaction. That takes thoughtful, strategic, collaborative conversations that are built in. And again, this large institution that I mentioned, they proved that. They made it mandatory. The SVP came and said, I want to see meetings weekly with your directors in your calendar, no less than 30 minutes. And what resulted was resilient. People could problem solve together. They figured it out. So challenges became opportunities, as Candice would say. And so it has to be lived through and trust that we are, as Rahul would say in his beautiful way, better together. But it has to be built into the way we do things here.
Thank you. Rahul?
I'd add to that, in my experience, this learning culture, it's a journey, not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's really important that leaders, first of all, lead by example in this and don't set it up as a destination. And it's just a series of initiatives. People will, they'll check boxes and move on. The environments that I've seen this most successful in, it's going to sound a little counterintuitive for some, but if it's fun, it lasts.
100%.
And people really want to be a part of that. And learning doesn't have to be, a brutal journey of finding out what you don't know. That's not the point. So how you want to frame this, I think, can have huge, influence on how it's adopted and how it influences the organization.
Thank you. We have several questions about AI, so let me ask you one of them to the three of you from your different perspectives. Do you see evidence that broad AI adoption is redefining what effective leadership looks like and which roles remain necessary? So AI adoption as a way to redefine what effective leadership looks like and also about which roles remain necessary. Candice, let's start with you.
I do think we are living through one of the greatest transformations of our lifetime. And it has to, like the gravitas is real. And so what I think it's redefining is you have a new type of workforce that we are just getting to understand and know what they're capable of and what it means for our organizations. And I always like to say, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And so, I sort of do a keynote on this and talk about some of the examples of organizations where like AI agents are so core to the new workforce that leadership has changed because you have to figure out, what work are the agents doing? What work are the humans doing? And how do they play nice with each other? And how does it actually capability build for the humans as opposed to just erase, human jobs? And so if it would be impossible for leaders not to redefine how they lead with this type of capability that is now available to us. So I think there's certain organizations that are further along the adoption curve than others. And there's certain infrastructure you need to actually see this leadership change. So most AI adoption today is at the individual level still with individual tools, but we're moving to shared infrastructure layers where all of a sudden an organization's context or backbone has, all of our data and information available. That certainly will change how you lead your teams and what work agents do and what work humans do.
Okay, Rahul, from the ICD perspective, what have you seen in terms of AI changing leadership?
So it raises a number of very interesting questions. I mean, there's an extraordinary efficiency that AI brings to, let's say, boards of directors. So for example, if you're serving on a public company board and you've got a risk register or you've got 1,000 pages to read for your risk committee, that's more than a lot of human beings can really process and really analyze. But now you've got a tool that's able to do some extraordinary work for you. But it's starting to beg the question, though, how much are you delegating to this new tool? And there's a big issue around that. At law, there are only certain things that you can delegate. As a fiduciary, you can't delegate certain things. And there's a real gray area that I think is emerging there. But it's a tool that people are starting to work through. It's got some advantages. People are worried about the downside. It's a very live conversation. If I build out the lens for a second, though, the conversation that we're having now is a very, I would say, Western world, industrial, post-industrial economy conversation to have, because there's still a digital divide on the planet. We've got 2 billion people that don't have access to clean water and to electricity. Where do they fit into this AI emerging world? Is going to be a big TBD with some potential real downside as well, and some potential upside depending on how it's used. So we're not even through the first inning. I think we're still first batter up in this game. So there's a lot to be done.
Molly, what is your perspective?
Well, I would combine both and go back to something we noticed that was a theme, is this mindset of leadership. So what is our responsibility as leaders with AI? What is our responsibility with leaders as AI and our future leaders to grow and develop? And this mindset of having a learner's mindset. At the end of the day, AI and our efficiencies, they're so important to adapt to, and they're only we as humans will only adapt to them when we can make sense of them. So it still requires conversations. It still requires a learner's mindset to say, hey, what do you think? What do you know? What do you see? How do we access the inner wisdom, the real life experience that EI is having in organizations, and continue to recalibrate? Humans need to make sense of what is in place in order for it to impact results. And so I would say keep that learner's mindset. And these future leaders that we have are absolutely bringing a rich level of understanding of the world that we could learn from. And we still have a responsibility to make sense of how we do things here and the way we do things here with AI.
Thank you, Molly. We have a question about decision making. When you navigate uncertainty in 2026, what core values or core principles will you rely on in your decision making? So tell us about how you're going to do it, and we can start that conversation. Think about 2026 core values, core principles that will guide you in 2026 in your decision making. Rahul, let me start with you.
Sure. I'm going to broaden the lens just a touch, because in some respects, my own, I would say, direction is not dramatically than it would have been earlier in one really important way, because it's principle driven. And I don't think a week goes by when I don't have a conversation with myself about, did I lead enough this week, or did I manage too much this week? And, in real short form, leading, did I do the right things? Managing, am I doing things right? At the end of a week, if I felt I've had a week where I'm just too much in the weeds and too much of a management mindset, then I know I'm not doing what I should be focused on, which is doing the right things. So it's an ongoing conversation that I'll have to make sure that I've got the right balance in my mind for what I think the times require in my position at this time, the leading versus management conversation. The other ones, though, if you want to talk about principles, all of the leadership character principles that we know are out there are worth looking at, because you can't just pull them out of a hat at any given time and focus on any one. So I would look at to broaden the lens a little bit, but given your role and given you what you want to accomplish, what works for me is having that conversation around leading versus managing.
Great, thank you. Candice?
Sure. I love that, Rahul. I would say, I think about decisions, there's two buckets, and I treat those buckets quite differently. So one is, are these reversible decisions, or are they irreversible decisions? And I like to really make sure I'm discerning around which are irreversible or more irreversible than others, and which are reversible. On the irreversible decisions, I think it goes back to what Molly so beautifully articulated, which is we need deep thinking. You need slow thinking for these irreversible decisions. And you need to carve out the time to have that type of thinking as a leader. And for those decisions, I'm going to be slow to act and much more intentional in understanding the scenarios and sort of the likelihood of outcomes. The second one is reversible decisions. These are decisions that my team is waiting on, that I am the blocker often for making. And I'm actually going to remove myself as much as possible for my team to make fast decisions. And the reason for that is we often slow our teams down by thinking that we are needed in many decisions that we may not be. And so how fast can reversible decisions be made so that we can actually allow our companies to innovate and adapt to the market realities?
Okay, thank you. Molly?
Yeah, I really appreciate that notion of discerning. In decision making, we all have our own set of values, our own purpose as leaders. And Rahul shared a couple of his principles. And so I think what's interesting around this question is that there's personal leadership values. What do you stand for? How do you want to represent yourself aligned with the responsibility of you in the organization? And then the organization has values. And so how do we understand what is the decision? I love that, Candice. What is the reversible or irreversible decision? Who am I in this situation? And what behavior decision can I make that's aligned with me and the organization? I think it's in the lens of the beholder. And yeah, it takes thoughtfulness. Absolutely powerful thinking that could be short and mighty.
Thank you. Thank you. I hear a lot of themes, in this conversation. We are close to ending now, about our connection back to humanity, and it's counterintuitive, we're talking so much about AI, but a lot of you are bringing how can we advance, extend, expand, leverage our humanity and also human connection and collaboration. We have reached the end of our time, so I want to again extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists, Rahul Bhardwaj, Molly Edge, and Candice Faktor, for generously sharing their time and invaluable expertise on these important topics. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us online today, from wherever you are in the world. And if you would like to revisit this conversation or share it with your networks, we will send you a video link early next week that you can share. For more information on the Ihnatowycz Institute's thought leadership on character, competencies, and commitment, please visit www.ivey.ca/leadership. And don't forget to also visit ivyimpact.ca for future Impact Life events and the latest in Ivey's thought leadership. Finally, at the close of this event, a quick post-event survey will pop up. And I would like to thank you in advance for sharing your feedback, because it helps us to continue to deliver meaningful Impact Life programming. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Rahul, Candice, and Molly. And I wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.